Good afternoon, everybody. It's Lorraine, Alternative Homesteading. It's January 30th, 2024. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome, newcomers. It's still raining here in eastern Kentucky. It's overcast. I thought the sun was coming out for a little bit, but it did not. The sky is white, drizzly, it's yucky, it's muddy. I've been cleaning out chicken coops, reading, doing laundry, and all that kind of good stuff. It's not nice outside. But anyway, I came across a journal article that I'd like to read to you. I saved a lot of journal articles when I was performing research for my master's degree. And sometimes I'd come across things that were really interesting, even if they didn't have anything to do with what I was studying, and I would save it. So this one is from the Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry Law. It's volume 26, number 1, and this goes back to 1998, okay? So this is old. So this is not a topic that hasn't been researched extensively before. And the topic is Corruption in Law Enforcement, a Paradigm of Occupational Stress and Deviancy. This is by Frances L. McCafferty. She's a medical doctor. And Margaret A. McCafferty, an RN. She's a nurse. And perhaps they're sisters. Maybe it's a mother and a daughter. A doctor and a nurse. So here we go. But before I do, please hit the thumbs up. Share if you feel inclined to do so. And here we go. In the closed society of a law enforcement agency, factors such as the conspiracy of silence, authoritarian supervision, and police discretion contribute to corruption. This article describes various types of corrupt behavior by police officers, reports the incidence of corruption in law enforcement agencies, discusses psychiatric conditions that may arise from corruption and also contribute to further corruption, and reviews proposed remedies for corruption. It also suggests that an understanding of corruption in law enforcement might be helpful in understanding, correcting, and preventing corruption in other professions, including medicine. Well, that's interesting, right? So the institution is the lengthened shadow of the man. This is a quote by Emerson. So here we go. Police officers are both respected and suspected, hated and loved, feared and courted for favor, maligned and praised. They wield tremendous power and are capable of depriving others of their freedom, their reputations, and their lives. Most of us assume in our dealings with police officers that they are all competent, honest, professional, and psychologically stable. This is true of the majority of officers, but there are also those officers who are dishonest, corrupt, incompetent, and psychologically unstable. Some use their shields as a license to steal and or kill. Most law enforcement agencies recruit the best officers possible. What happens to some of these officers that makes them corrupt? This article explores the factors that contribute to their corruption based on more than 30 years of experience that one of the authors, FLM, has had in psychiatric evaluation and treatment of law enforcement officers. So this medical doctor has treated and evaluated police officers. So the types of corruption in law enforcement are as follows. Police corruption in the context of this article is, quote, the use of one's status as a police officer for wrongful gain or benefits, unquote. An investigation of the Chicago Police Department from 1970 to 76 revealed that officers engaged in 10 types of corrupt behavior. Now, I'm going to read this, guys, but you have to remember, this is research from the 70s, and we all know how that has changed. But this is from the 70s. There are 10 types of corrupt behavior, and this article is written in 1998. Imagine if the research were performed today and how the language might change, okay? So this is going back a long time, from the 1970s. Society was very different then. Number 1, mooching. Receiving gratuities such as free meals, sometimes in return for favoritism. 2, chiseling. Demanding free or discounted admission to sporting events or other events not connected with police duties. 3, favoritism. Granting immunity from police action to certain citizens or peers, such as fixing parking or traffic violations. Number 4, prejudice. Treating certain groups differently, particularly minority groups, because their influence within the political structure is not likely to cause trouble for the officer. 5, shopping. Stealing small items from a store on one's beat when the door is accidentally left unlocked during non-business hours. 6, extortion. Demanding a cash payment and promising that in return the police making the payment will be protected. Oh, the person making the payment will be protected from police action. Accepting bribes. Accepting an unsolicited cash payment as from a bar owner or a person who wishes to avoid prosecution. Number 8 is a shakedown. Stealing expensive items for personal use as from a crime scene and attributing their loss to criminal activity. Number 9, perjury. Lying to protect a fellow officer or oneself in a court of law or during an internal affairs division investigation. 10, premeditated theft. Carrying out a planned burglary. Dr. Edward Shev, S-H-E-V, a veteran psychiatrist for the Sausalito, California Police Department, has his own classification. Cops, but he wrote it differently. He wrote parentheses, the letter C, and then ops, O-P-S, are routinely subjected to temptations that I call the 3 B's: booze, broads, and bribes, and today, drugs. That is, the pressure of the job may lead to their drinking while on duty, perhaps accepting free drinks at bars or restaurants on their beats. Many police in the line of duty have daily contact with persons who work to become sexually involved with them. And any number of persons would be willing to bribe a cop to have him ignore some offense or criminal activities. For many, these temptations become harder to resist as time goes by. Middle-aged officers seem especially vulnerable in this regard. Some of the many other types of corrupt behavior that police officers engage in are carrying unauthorized weapons, taking property from recovered stolen cars, and keeping guns, knives, drugs that are confiscated from suspects, having sex with informants in vice and narcotics investigations, selling confidential information to lawyers and insurance companies, going to movies, sleeping, and doing personal chores while on duty, using deceptive means in interrogation of subjects, collecting quote-unquote kickbacks from lawyers for drunk driving arrests or auto accident investigations, and assault, personal communication. The videotaped beating of Rodney King in Los Angeles police officers was an unusually high-profile example of an assault, but there's also evidence that corruption and brutality may be linked. A 1994 study in the New York City Police Department found that corruption-prone officers were more than 5 times more likely than other officers to have 5 or more complaints filed against them about the use of unnecessary force. So here we are, 5 times more likely to have 5 times more complaints, okay? Corruption in law enforcement. Some female police officers have experienced chronic sexual harassment inside station houses. Everything from male officers making sophomoric and threatening jokes to grabbing their crotches and breasts. Some of this behavior is criminal assault. Little has been written about corruption among female police officers, but there is evidence that they are prone to the same types of corruption as male officers. One example is the arrest and conviction of a female officer in New Orleans Police Department for 3 counts of first-degree murder. One of the victims was a fellow officer who had been her work partner. This officer was also suspected of shakedowns and robberies of small-time criminals and of setting up innocent people to take the responsibility for the crimes she committed. The incidence of corruption in law enforcement, if such activities as free meals are excluded, a significant number of police officers do not engage in any corrupt activities. But with extremely rare exceptions, even those who do not engage in corrupt activities are indirectly involved because they do not report what they know or suspect. And that goes for targeted individuals, folks. We all know that when we file incident reports, police reports, they're not reporting the truth in those reports. They're turning a blind cheek, and they are involved in conspiracy against rights. In some large urban departments, even the reported extent of corruption is staggering. A 1972 study revealed that 1 of every 3 police officers in Chicago was found to be guilty of a criminal act, 1 of 4 in Boston, 1 of 5 in Washington, D.C. Their crimes included assault, theft, shakedown, extortion, and accepting bribes. Now let me just scroll up here because this is a journal article, so I have to keep going back and forth. The Knapp Commission report on police corruption, published in 1973, charged that as many as half of all officers in New York Police Department were corrupt. Half. Now this is back in the 1970s. Could you imagine what it is now, guys? It must be an exception to not be corrupt, to be a New York City police officer now. According to 1994 report, 100 of the 1,046 Miami police officers had been or are currently being investigated on corruption-related matters. And officials predicted that as many as 200 additional officers might eventually be investigated. In New Orleans in 1995, the local U.S. District Attorney and several watchdog groups estimated that between 10 and 15% of the 1,500 police departments were corrupt. It is obviously difficult to get an accurate statistic. Law enforcement agencies are reluctant to reveal serious corruption, that's true, and some actively conceal it. That's true, because when lawsuits are filed against them, it's gagged. If there's a settlement, there's always a gag order, and then the lawsuit is wiped from the internet. And this is back in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, guys. Could you imagine what it is now? Avoiding headlines becomes more important than eradicating corruption, and institutional cover-ups send the message to police officers that corruption will be tolerated. So what about corruption in other professions? Law enforcement corruption has parallels in other agencies of government, in industry and labor, and in other professions. In medicine, the business ethics and bottom-line mentality, quote-unquote, of managed care are being substituted for medical ethics and the noble ideals of the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors are now expected to maintain high-quality care with a shrinking level of reimbursement, and the pressure to cut corners is tremendous. The Oslerian tradition, which tolerates no interference in the physician-patient relationship, is being subverted as physicians work to please the managed care organization rather than the patient. In law, Increased competition is forcing some attorneys to overbill, lie to clients, mingle practice and personal funds, and so on. Additionally, the promise of large verdicts and press coverage lures some attorneys to engage in unlawful solicitation of accident victims. The intensity of the anger that the attorneys face from clients and other attorneys, the corruption that they encounter, and the stress of practice are other reasons that attorneys may abandon personal integrity. And of course, we all know that they're all involved in taking bribes, in gang stalking, turning the blind cheek of targeted people on some list to be tormented for the rest of their lives. Yes, they're turning a blind cheek and taking bribes, taking kickbacks. Knowledge of the factors that contribute to corruption in law enforcement will be helpful in understanding, correcting, and preventing corruption in other professions, including medicine and law. These factors include the conspiracy of silence, authoritarian supervision, and professional discretion. So what are the contributors to corruption? There's the conspiracy of silence. The conspiracy of silence is not limited to law enforcement. It's also present in religion, medicine, law, business, and government, where it is felt that, quote, outsiders don't understand, unquote. In law enforcement agency, the conspiracy of silence is based on quote-unquote code that defines the acceptable standards of practice. Well, they didn't have the thin blue line back in the day, so let's talk about the thin blue line. Yes, that's what it is. It's their code. It's the thin blue line. It's not the American flag anymore. Where practices exist that in a citizen's view are corrupt, but in a police officer's view are within the code. The conspiracy of silence sanctions and strengthens their continuance. Officers lie for each other, and if someone quote-unquote rats out, he or she can be ratted out. Such a system tends to nullify the internal investigative apparatus of law enforcement agency. An intense group loyalty develops among police officers, and this contributes to the conspiracy of silence. Group loyalty often overcomes an officer's sworn oath and duty. It makes allegiance to fellow officers, even corrupt ones, more important than the allegiance to the idols of the law enforcement agency and the community. The conspiracy of silence is strongest where corruption is most frequent. Officers who report law enforcement misconduct are ostracized, harassed, called rats and finks. They become targets of complaints and even physical threats and attacks, and are made to feel that they will be abandoned on the streets in a time of crisis. Oh yes, that happened in the Manalapan Police Department. When a police officer there filed an internal complaint, and the chief of police, Michael Fountain, at the time that he was chief of police, decided to call his police officer an enemy of the state, target him, send his other police officers to his home when he was out sick to make sure he was still there, take his firearms away from him, and file a complaint with the prosecutor's office, which was actually false, in fact. Well, fortunately, that police officer filed a lawsuit against the Manalapan Police Department and the Township of Manalapan, and they settled out of court with a gag order. Yeah, so they turned the tides on this police officer merely for filing a complaint about what the corrupt chief of police said to this police officer's wife at a hockey meeting or hockey meet or something. So what about authoritarian supervision? In a law enforcement agency, discipline is frequently maintained by a, quote, a tyranny of proceduralism that ensures absolute compliance with agency rules of operation. Regulations for all practical purposes are effectively used to silence the nonconformists who dare to deviate from the administrative lines, unquote. It becomes impossible to be a police officer without violating some procedure or regulation. And under authoritarian supervisor, the violation can be used to intimidate, control, or punish the officer. So here you see, guys, like police officers can become targets of harassment in the workplace, particularly females. This can lead to attrition of officers who are honest or who do not support the authoritarian supervisors. Police officers who are frustrated and resentful over the lack of respect shown to them may use corruption as a means of, quote unquote, getting back at their supervisors, or they themselves may act in an overly authoritarian way on the streets, where they feel free to express their feelings without fear of retaliation. As job dissatisfaction increases, there is an increased tendency for officers to act out against citizens on the basis of race or national origin. And actually, as I'm reading this, guys, I was just attacked to my left ear. I just received an attack to my left ear by the criminals. Police discretion. Oh, it was right after I spoke about the Manalapan Police Department lawsuit against that chief of police, the criminal. Oh, yes. Well, yeah, we all know about the police department there and all the police departments in New Jersey. Police discretion. No set of regulations can address every possible circumstance. No police officers are given discretion to decide which laws will be enforced, as well as when, where, or how. Officers decide whether or not to arrest, use deadly force, prosecute, permit participation in plea bargaining, impose punishment, and treat citizens fairly. So it's at their discretion. Therefore, individual and institutional ethics, the ethics become critical. For example, when a police officer goes into court, the slightest spin of his testimony can make or break a case. How he reacts to a suspect running from the scene of crime might mean the difference between that person's life or death. The officer can influence a jury to convict an innocent person, acquit a guilty person, or, in the extreme, permit someone to get away with murder. A more subtle form of discretion is provision or non-provision of services by a police officer. For example, in community policing, you hear that word? In community policing, an officer performs many services unrelated to law enforcement, ranging from managing domestic disputes to helping store owners. Officers frequently find themselves in situations where they could extort money, goods, or favors in return for performing or not performing service. Guys, I wonder how many targeted people, how many of those cops that you filed incident reports with, do you think that they were bribed? Inquiring minds want to know. The possibilities for harassment and street justice are limited only by the level of integrity and the imagination of the officer. Psychiatric conditions that may develop in police officers. Now, mind you guys, this is research back in the 70s and this is written in the 1990s. Okay, so stress that police officers encounter is extraordinary. Symptoms of personality disorder may be secondary to overwhelming stress and the individual's attempts to cope with that stress. Borderline personality disorder. And just as a side, guys, I've actually lectured on this topic. I've actually provided research to I'm forgetting her name, Randy Krieger. She wrote 2 books, and I provided research for her second book. This symptomology in particular, is often an adaptation to stress. Police officers may exhibit a pattern of irrational and intense relationships, alternating between over-idealization of fellow officers and devaluation of citizens. Self-damaging impulsiveness, for example, overspending, promiscuous sexual activity, substance abuse, and theft. Affective instability, inappropriately intense anger or lack of control, suicide threats, persistent identity disturbance, for example, self-image, long-term goals, the types of friends they have, and their preferred values, and a chronic feeling of emptiness that was not present prior to the stress of police work. And I'm going to add, with regard to borderline personality disorder, their interpersonal relationships are often very shallow and unstable. So people that are diagnosed with BPD, they often have extremely volatile relationships with people, and they come and go. They don't trust. Then you've got the narcissistic personality disorder, as outlined in the DSM-4. Narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by a lack of empathy, exploitation of others, arrogance, a sense of entitlement, and a belief that one has special powers or abilities. Then there's the antisocial personality. And we've discussed some of these in my previous videos. This describes people who lack a conscience and have no sense of right or wrong. They're very often shrewd. Police officers with this personality type may steal whatever they can from an unreported robbery scene, or race to be first to a robbery scene so they can steal whatever is available. Now, I'm going to say this for a fact. None of the incident reports that I filed with the Manalapan police when I lived in New Jersey, 52 Sutton Drive in Manalapan, never made it to their police blotter. Why wouldn't they report those incidences? Well, because they were involved, and they were stealing whatever they could from the unreported robbery scene. And maybe they were the first to be at the robbery scene, so they could steal whatever was available. Such officers may be weeded out by police academy instructors and field training of officers, as well as by means of psychological testing and background investigations. And I firmly believe that police should undergo psychological testing and background investigations, not just when they're hired, but potentially annually. Passive dependent or inadequate personality. This describes the so-called grass eaters who cannot trust themselves under any pressure from peers or in situations of great temptation. These individuals rationalize that their behavior is acceptable because others do it. Treatable personalities. These individuals conform, but they resent their conformity. As they see others getting away with dishonest activities, they function in a state of tension between their conscience and what they would like to get away with. Police officers who fit this description can be helped by leaders who support them and encourage them to perform their duties well. The lessening of stress would help to prevent an increased incident of suicide and early retirement among police officers, and their attempts to go off duty on disability. So some of the remedies for corruption, some of the remedies in corruption of law enforcement are trained leaders of integrity. The most important factor for prevention of corruption in law enforcement agency, besides the personal integrity of individual officers, is a leader who's mature, seasoned, stable, has personal integrity, and a strong personal ethic. The leader needs to be under civil service protection or protected in some way from the whims of politicians. Do you hear that? From the whims of politicians, and free from the fear of being fired or neutralized if he or she does not yield to their wishes. Ideally, the leader should be an attorney. Oh yeah, Oh, yeah. Well, could you name me a few ethical attorneys? Inquiring minds like to know. Leave the comments down below if you can name me some 10. Well, actually, on YouTube there are quite a few of them. Ideally, the leader should be an attorney able to understand and deal with the more subtle areas of possible corruption in law enforcement. Policing has become more complex and difficult than in the past, and police officers need to know the legal implications of what they do. A police chief has to instruct the lieutenants and captains as to how to handle situations, and there's rarely an attorney readily available to help him or her make these decisions. Oh, except here in Jackson County, Kentucky. Our county lawyer makes all the decisions for the sheriff's department. It is not advisable for a police officer who has come up through the ranks to become a leader of law enforcement agency unless there is great confidence that the agency is free from corruption. The promotion of an insider will tend to perpetuate the problems. I agree with that. I won't name them, but a whole bunch of them in the Manalapan Police Department were promoted from within after that chief of police retired. Likewise, the leader of a law enforcement agency should not name his or her successor, and it's not good policy for an acting leader to be appointed leader. Oh, well, that's what goes on here. That's what happens in a small town. Everybody gets recycled. In 1973 report, New York Police Department, the Knapp Commission, K-N-A-P-P, suggested forming a National Police Academy. Police officers who had a college degree, police academy training, and at least 1 year of work experience would complete a 1 or 2 year master's degree program. The program would be designed to instill professionalism and the knowledge, awareness, and ability to combat corruption. Well, I'm going to tell you for a fact, guys, I know some police in Manalapan, New Jersey that do have master's degree, and they're corrupt as hell. These officers would assume leadership roles in law enforcement agencies with the assistance of grants. Oh, yes. They would assume leadership roles in law enforcement agencies with the assistance of grants from the federal government. A variation of this idea was a suggestion for a program similar to an officer's candidate school that could be accomplished on a part-time basis. So, there are a couple more pages here. I'm going to kind of end here. I've got some stuff to do, so I'm just going to name the things that can be done to help police officers with better hiring, longer probation, meaning that instead of 1 year for new officers, it should be 18 months to 2 years. That would be helpful in uncovering problematic officers. Better supervision. You need better leaders of law enforcement agencies. Leaders must also find ways to ensure that supervisors intervene. Better pay. Well, actually, they get paid pretty well these days, guys. I know many officers that are promoted, maybe not as soon as they get in, but they're earning 6 figures, guys. Plus, they've got health benefits, paid time off. They're getting pretty good salaries. And then, of course, their retirement funds. More attention to the code of ethics. I think this is key. I think this is really key. They should be penalized for not enforcing the code of ethics. Regular reevaluation of office. It says every 5 years of services. I disagree. I think a regular means annual. Just the way you get an annual physical. These guys, they're under stress, right? They're dealing with a lot. They've got personal issues. Sometimes they're not getting any sleep. You know, they're up all night. They're seeing people get unalived and stuff. I don't think it should be every 5 years of service. I believe that they should be reevaluated for their psychological stability and undergo other background investigation on an annual basis. That's just my personal take on that. Officers would be monitored more frequently if they work in areas of law enforcement with a high potential for corruption, like, drug enforcement units, undercover operations, vice handling and storage of evidence in property rooms, or if they're in the jurisdiction where a targeted individual resides. I'm just adding that, folks. Better discipline, better evaluation of complaints. Well, that's not going to happen. Etc., etc. If anybody would like a copy of this article, I do have the PDF. You can email me at AlternativeHomesteading@gmail.com, or you can search for it online. I will type in the description section the authors and the journal. So I hope you enjoyed this information, this interesting information back from the 1990s. And please leave a comment down below. How do you see that this has changed from the 1990s to now, 2024? What should be added in this journal? What should be investigated in this journal? I look forward to your questions, comments down below. This is Lorraine, Alternative Homesteading, signing off for now.